Listen. So not even 2 months ago, The Craft Legacy was released to rent for $20, and it was meant to be a standalone sequel to the cult classic, but that thing took a seat faster than Blago, and now you can own both as a bundle for $19.99. I was curious to catch Legacy, not because I grew up with the original, I was more of a Heathers fan, but I was curious to see what Zoe Lister-Jones crafted up, since I absolutely love her Sundance film Band-Aid and highly recommend it. So big spoilers if you haven't seen either of those, because I'd say the first is still worth renting, to stream it for the new one, but with our Movie Trivia Fridays coming back at the end of the year, you may be able to win a gift card for those with your cinema knowledge. So a big shout out to our sponsor, the Sanderson Witches, for partnering with us, and I'm just kidding. It is YouTube. Shout out Surfshark. Let me explain. The Craft. So the 1996 movie, in my opinion, still holds up, especially when you compare it to the new one. But if you wanted more of a fan's perspective, I would highly recommend these two videos right here, which break it down perfectly and get more into the culture side of it and all the impact that it had. But it's interesting to see how different the cinematic landscape is now. Like in the early 2000s, parents were censoring the Potter books for not being kosher enough. They had separate groups during Halloween so that kids wouldn't mix with this cosplay sorcery. And now it seems every studio's working on a witch property for families. There's also a lot more coming-of-age stories that have developed since the 90s, exploring a variety of perspectives. And honestly, high school kids in general have just embraced being awkward.
We are the weirdos, mister.
So the story takes place in an LA high school where a trio spot the new girl named Sarah and decide to bring her into the group to cover all four corners of their coven. Bonnie, Rochelle, and Nancy are considered to be the outcasts of the school, and everyone deems them to be witches. They have their own burn book. They're teaching Sarah how to pull a Corey Baxter at the local craft store.
Get the 5-finger discount.
It's crazy to think, though, how different the movie would have been if they would have cast the other actresses who came to test for the roles, but honestly, it's the chemistry between these four that I think made it a cult classic. Sarah's the most grounded out of the group, and it just so happens that her element is Earth. She has these psychic powers that she inherited from her mother, who died at childbirth, and that causes Sarah to spiral into a deep depression filled with hallucinations. But what's interesting about her character is how her powers reflect how she's feeling about herself, meaning that early on when she's alone, she's unknowingly pulling a Danny Moonstar and hurting herself because of them. Hell, she's so oblivious to her powers that she's telepathically sharpening a Ticonderoga in the middle of class, and it isn't until she gains her own self-confidence and is able to speak to her mother from the beyond that she's able to control her powers and able to manifest every trick in the book, to the point that by the end of it, she's the only one to retain her powers at maximum strength. That said, the best character is still. Now, I've seen Fairuza in American History X, Almost Famous, and of course, Waterboy.
I'm very, very interested in your boy, Miss Boucher.
Really? Well, did he tell you about how much his feet smell?
Mama.
He has to wear 2 pairs of socks.
No man is supposed to have stinky feet.
But she absolutely owns this movie. Her element is wind, and she's the one who really gathers everyone together as she shows the most interest in the craft out of the group. This girl's got a noose hanging from her locker. In real life, she's hanging out with Black Phillip's cousin. Even some of the best lines in the movie were improvised by her.
I love a woman in uniform.
Since she's been living next to B Rabbit this whole time, she goes overboard when she finally is able to manifest her powers, but it also kind of makes sense considering how abusive her stepdad was, and we see how each of the girls takes the trauma that they've grown up with and how their newfound powers affects them. Bonnie was in a car accident that caused her entire backside to be scarred, and since then she's been more reserved, until she casts a spell that turns her into a wild thing. Rochelle, I would actually highly recommend searching up how the studio practically booted her from the promos for whatever reason, or how they shot a scene with her parents, but then the studio decided to cut it because, Lord forbid, she has some like the other girls. And yet it's those disadvantages that they cover in the movie. While Bonnie's element is fire, Rochelle's is water, with her being a diver who struggles to reach her full potential because she gets bullied by the white chicks.
Oh, God, look, there is a pubic hair in my brush. Oh, no, wait. That's just one of Rochelle's little nappy hairs.
Do you think you're funny?
You really want to know why?
Yes, I really want to know why.
Because I don't like me.
Now, if you haven't seen this movie, and don't know what she says here, bruh, I was flabbergasted. Be it the 90s. So while Zoolander would be disappointed in her, he'd be happy with this boy's blue streak.
Do you ever stop and wonder where it comes from?
No. I can't think, I just feel.
Chris is the jerk jock who's just ready to hit it and Skeet, and it's the love spell that they put on him that ends up leading to the animosity between the group as they start cursing each other out. And the thing is, when you open up a curse, they break it down that it's kind of like a virus and it needs to run its course, pretty much abiding by the golden rule as well.
Whatever you send out, you get back ×3.
They have an entire theology on who they're summoning, claiming that it's not the devil, because you see in the movie how they dismiss the serpents that appear. They clearly don't care about the lamb either.
It's nature. If God and the devil were playing football, Manor would be the stadium that they played on.
They also hired a Wiccan to be on set to supervise the handling of the spells, with Fairuza having practice before she went on set. And really, she's been at it since she was a kid.
That is a remarkable spell. If only we knew how we did it. It would be one of those stories. You know, the ones we tell our grandchildren. If I live to have any.
What's crazy though is that they ended up getting an R rating because of the Wiccan theology that they showed there, and even though they argued that it wasn't Satan worship, you know, the MPAA doesn't care. Thus, they limited the amount of girls that were in their target demographic from watching the movie in theaters, and it underperformed before, you know, levitating to the top of home video. But it's just crazy to think that the race elements, you know, the class, the way they covered suicide, coming of age, whatever they had Laura say, all of that I guess was okay. But a spell? The production also brought in all of these bugs that you see in the film. You know, they had over 10,000 snakes, and the cast showed up not realizing that they would all be real. I think it's that commitment to the practical effects that made it a hit, though. The light as a feather scene stands the test of time because of the wiring work that they did to pull it off, and it all intertwines well with the story as they combine all 4 elements on the beach towards the end. Now, I know that there's some criticism towards it. I know that a lot of people see it as a movie about just women fighting other women. You know, even the best character ends up in an asylum looking like Charles Lee Ray. And when you consider what Fleming has gone on to direct, I can't argue that it's something he loves to put up on screen. But hey, it won the best fight at the MTV Movie Awards.
And Jim, Carrey, I want you to know, you're probably feeling really sad and vulnerable right now, but I think that if you had breasts and computer imaging, you'd be standing right here collecting your third one.
That said, despite the third act, to many it's still an inspiring movie focusing on the outcast in this high school setting, and it could really be seen as women literally lifting each other up at some points.
Are you girls getting hot?
No.
It's a movie that tells you that there's no shortcut to fixing things, and that includes magic.
Nothing makes everything all better again.
So for a 90s cult classic that did very well on home video, you know it was only a matter of time till they rebooted and continued this story, and where its biggest themes concentrated on what we put out into the world and how it come back to us threefold, which is probably what Sony expected in returns for the sequel, and they just ended up dividing. Now, unless you're a teenage witch in a 2020 reboot, chances are you're online a lot, and when it comes to VPNs, there are dozens upon dozens of options. This is probably the third one you've seen while binging videos, but here's why Surfshark's your best option. Say you clicked on one of these links without using a VPN, and then notice that every site you go on seems to be tracking you because they're advertising the same VPN you clicked on, and you end up in a VPNception of ads. Well, that's where Surfshark comes in. Legit, I've used several of these services, and not only does Surfshark excel at all of the basics that you expect it to, but they go beyond with their customer service, down to the partnership that they have with us to bring you these videos. It's the perfect tool to bypass the goofy geo-blocking restriction that sites try to impose on visitors, with Surfshark's mantra being that access should not be tied to nationality. And during shopping season, it's also a great way to find better prices, secure your transactions, and it protects you at home or on the go, since you can download it for most of your devices with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you're interested in getting a VPN and want to support the channel, head over to surfshark.deal/letmeexplain and use promo code LetMeExplain to get 84% off plus a whole 4 extra months for free with this holiday special. Now, after the first one, Fleming had actually worked on a sequel that would take place in the same school and continue the girls' legacy, but I guess the studio dragged on it, so it didn't end up happening. Decades later, with the help of Blumhouse, they went through several scripts before landing on Zoe's pitch for the story, and then marketed it as a standalone sequel. You know, until it wasn't.
For everyone who the craft belongs to from 1996, that is your craft. That is your craft. That is your time. That is what you needed. I think right now this craft is for like my generation, and I feel like it's like for us because it's like with the way of the world now.
Now, like I said, go watch Bandit. I absolutely love that movie, and it not only showcases the strengths that Zoe has as a director, but as an actress as well, with her even being a G and bringing up a majority of her team from that movie over here with the cinematographer, production designer, producers, editors, and yet I feel like the Band-Aid characters would goof on this movie if they saw it.
That
Congratulations.
Okay.
Cool.
Like the first, they brought on 3 practicing witches to consult on the set. It's also about a trio of girls looking for their 4th, and even follows the new girl the same way the original does.
Well, I didn't want anyone to know that this was a sequel. My intention was that people would go in thinking it was a reboot, and then in the final moment, they'd be like, oh shit, it's a sequel.
Now, I actually think that's a pretty dope idea, and it reminds me of what they did with the ending of Split, but here they didn't switch the name since the studio was clearly riding on the IP, so I get why fans feel like they were duped, because, well, they kind of were with the marketing. If it had a different name, and maybe, you know, not the same beats as the first, it would have been a dope surprise, and I think been closer to Zoe's pitch, but one thing's for sure. The characters needed more than 90 minutes. So we follow Lily, played by Cailee Spaeny, who was incredible in the miniseries Devs, and I highly recommend it. But here she's a new girl who's moving in with her mother's new boyfriend and his 3 sons, something that comes from Zoe's own background and the struggle she faced of feeling like an outcast in school. So Lily's in a state where she doesn't know who her real dad is. She's living in a stranger's mansion with 4 boys, and when she goes to her first period...
Ew! God, you seen this?
Timmy?
Sorry. I think you dropped something.
Gravity must have been working differently there. That's when a new trio of girls notice Lily's necklace and befriend her, revealing her earth element to be one of their 4 corners. They just kind of turn into clock stoppers.
Damn!
Lourdes, I think, had the potential to be one of the best characters out of the 4. If they just gave her more lines. It's clear that there's a lot more backstory that just wasn't covered. You know, it was just on the surface. It was mentioned that they had brought in a hood witch to give her expertise on brujeria. And you see it on the surface, but they never really get into it. Even in the scenes where Lourdes uses her powers to save a kid from getting bullied, she just changes his jacket into a rainbow, and it's like... his chuckle's just gonna get him pounded even.
Girl, we just filmed the movie. We didn't make the movie.
Tabby is played by Lovie Simone, who just came off of Sella and the Spades, which I really liked. I just wish this story right here was as intricate as the one over there. Granted, no other characters get family backstories like the first one did, but there were hints that she would be bringing a West African influence with her craft, the same way Frankie was meant to be a descendant of her ancestors from Salem. But like, I only know that from the behind the scenes. It's barely hinted in the production.
Yeah, I think I really wanted to celebrate friendship among women and the power of that friendship. And that these young women, when they do start embodying their power, they don't ultimately use it against each other, that they use that power to uplift and uphold each other.
While I appreciate that approach, it is kind of hard to root for characters when they don't have that development. You know, for a movie that's meant to be for a new generation, it's just a montage of greatest hits from the old without really earning them. They don't build up to the levitate bit. They just cut to it. Their abilities come off more like superpowers that they could turn on and off with some really convenient getaway scenes when they just stop time. But I did like their approach to their wardrobes and pushing the idea that a witch doesn't have to look like they shop at Hot Topic or toured with The Cure, but that they can wear anything. Costume designer Avery Pluis previously worked on Umbrella Academy and Ready or Not, and she's a really good costume designer. And I like how they based Tabby's clothes off of video games, giving her that feel of like a Kim Possible who can summon spells in her Club Bananas. But they even went as far as purchasing a lot of the outfits from regular retail stores so that future fans can imitate their style. Even their colors reflect their 4 elements throughout. But damn, they just had to add those goofy auras around them, right? So they look like they're in a Gatorade commercial.
There's a lot of pain for these men living just under the surface, especially now.
Another element Zoe added to her script dealt with the pressure that guys go through, having to maintain a certain level of manliness, you know? This is something that they also brought up in the previous Black Christmas remake, which also came from Blumhouse. And while Legacy isn't great, it's much better than what they tried to do there. And I do think it's an interesting thing to dissect, that it's not just something that's hurting the women in the story, but also some of the guys in the story. But as the target demo for the dudes, here I can fully say, y'all didn't fully have it. It came off a little goofy.
But if you really want to party, I've got this secret stash of LaCroix in the fridge downstairs.
I will admit, Woke Timmy I thought was hilarious, and his arc after getting hit with the love spell was the most compelling in the movie, because these kids just sat through a class about consent, and then they're running 2 spells on this boy simultaneously. I just wish this one had as much leeway as the 90s version, you know, because they actually went places in that one. They showed them slashing each other. They really felt their repercussions to the point that Rachel's own reflection wouldn't look at her. This one gets to a point where this kid who's struggling with his sexuality becomes so overwhelmed that it leads to his death. And these girls are drenched with guilt of having forced that out of him through a spell while also duping him into kissing them. And yet, that realization scene is so short compared to the montages we just sat through that it just feels like they said, "Can I do that?" Nah, Adam, could have been something, you know? They have this man in a mansion that they actually shot in real life, which was actually an old hospice and where 300 people died, and that's what this fool calls home. Just like Adam, his sons are also named after biblical characters as well, with his family sigil portraying snakes, which I'm sure builds to a whole hating Eve thing.
You know, snakes are usually considered scary or dangerous, but actually in pagan culture, they were symbols of rebirth.
But again, not enough time to develop it.
My boys, I have to have a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to violence. That's the way it's always been in this house.
Sir? What's done instead is the sprinkling of little things here and there, like this book that he wrote called The Hallowed Masculine. He's congregating with his fellow Menonists as he spews his beliefs of men living by a code and anyone showing weakness must be eradicated. He recants that he is their ruler and must restore order when men stray away from their image. Like, there's obviously people like this, and you could see how it's even traumatized his kid, because one of them is sleepwalking, another jerks off to torture porn with no headphones, but the thing is, they approached it like it was supposed to be a twist.
If Adam was such like an obvious kind of jerk, then that would reflect poorly on Michelle's character and as a mom, and then like the whole thing starts to fall apart. So I felt like we had to be very careful, even though we didn't have a lot of time in the relationship, to make sure that it was somewhat understandable on some level, so that this woman would take her child and put him in this house, you know. So it was tricky.
Yeah, for sure.
So spoiler alert for the most obvious twist, which involves this goofy Animorph reveal, and that's that he's the bad guy. Again, it's not just that it was very obvious, but it was rushed. For example, the girls go from making this really big decision of binding all their powers after Timmy's death so that they can't ever go. 6 minutes later, they're back. Like in the first, Sarah actually went through stuff after binding herself before actually getting the powers back. Here it's like when Chewie died for 5 minutes. You know, you gotta let it simmer a bit before hitting us with the psych. That said, they do airbender Adam's ass.
We are the weirdos, mister.
Now, like I mentioned earlier, the standalone marketing bit was clearly a lie, and that's disappointing because I really like the twist ending. So if you're a fan who had no hope, I do recommend catching it just for this bit here, because there may be a third movie. It is something that I think could have had a better lead up to it, and I do wish more time was spent fleshing out Lily's relationship with her mother, especially when she gets hit with the big news that she's adopted. Yet that scene only lasts 2 minutes, because I guess we needed all that build up with Adam. But in terms of the final shot, Fairuza duped us when she cast her earlier tweets, because it's revealed that Lily is her biological daughter and she's back in this movie. I think it's a dope twist, but it is one where I am wondering who could possibly be the father, considering the timeline. Why was this Polaroid cut from the trailer if it was a part of the marketing? And what kind of asylum would let her keep her nose ring? But hey, she's back. Overall, I like the theme Zoe approached in this movie about community being a way to strengthen yourself instead of turning on each other once you get powers. Blumhouse clearly likes its stories of evil men institutions, and I think one day they will make one that actually gets through to the people that they're trying to reach. But in the end, it just didn't capture the magic of the first. I don't expect them to be better than the iconic characters from the original, but I still expect them to be characters, and it's clear that a lot of what was pitched was cut down to fit into a 90-minute PG-13 movie that tried to bank off the legacy, but seemed to forget about the craft. Thank you guys for checking out this video. I'm curious to know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Again, as always, a big shout out to Surfshark for sponsoring, and I'm just curious to see where they're going to take this story. You know, even if I didn't love it, I hate it more when studios cut a story arc, you know, especially when a lot of what could have been done in this installment, it just isn't, you know. I'd still like to see where Zoe takes it.
You know, I think in writing this script, I always had a continuation in mind that would follow it. So, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
It'd be dope to see the rest of them come back, since Nancy ended up becoming the best character out of it, you know, and they still gave her a pretty cliche lock up the witch ending, so it would be dope to see her come back and kind of have some justice done for her. You know, they may play it that Sarah, who ended the first movie being super powerful, she could come back and maybe the powers get the best of her. Maybe they'll create a super franchise with a bunch of side quills following witches all around the world, you know. One thing I don't want to see, though, is I swear swear, because we don't know who Sarah's father is. I swear if it ends up being Manon, whatever his name was, yo, that is not something I want to see. This better not be a play on his initials at all. Nah. But other than that, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, theories, reactions. I don't know if I mentioned this, but y'all should definitely go check out Band-Aid. But let me know what you're curious to see in a third installment if they end up doing it, or if there's other properties that you think deserve more of this reboot style thing that they're trying to do with every 90s property. Everything's going to get remade. Other than that, I'm curious to know your thoughts. As always, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. And Kristen Stewart will come out in a sequel.